At some point in your business, you stopped being the person doing everything and became the person responsible for everyone. That shift happened gradually, and maybe so gradually you didn't even notice it as a transition. You just kept moving forward, kept handling what was right in front of you, and the team grew around you. Your business grew. But lately, something's starting to feel off in the way that you're leading. Maybe your team isn't responding the way that you expect or the way that they used to. Maybe decisions that should be straightforward create more friction than they should. Maybe you find yourself frustrated with people that you actually respect or pulling back from situations where you should be stepping forward. Or maybe it's quieter than that. Just a persistent sense that the way that you're showing up as a leader doesn't fully match who you know yourself to be and the version of you that you know you're capable of. That experience, that gap, it has a name. And in this video, I want to talk about what creates it and why it tends to surface at a specific stage in business growth and what it actually takes to close it. So if you're watching this, you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, and you're wondering why your output, why your performance is starting to stagnate despite finding some success. Well, I've developed the clear diagnostic that measures performance across 5 dimensions. So if you want to take that diagnostic and get your clear score so you can really measure your current performance, the link is in the description below. Make sure to check it out. This specific video is addressing one of the dimensions, the L, leadership identity. Most entrepreneurs never consciously choose their leadership identity. It's something that's formed under pressure. Early on, survival required a certain way of operating. Building that business required a certain identity that you just naturally adapted into. You had to move fast, make decisions alone, hold everything together while having very little support. And so the traits that served that environment and that experience got reinforced, and they became your default settings. Now, the problem with default settings is that they don't update automatically when the environment changes, when the business grows, when the team expands, when the decisions get more complex and more consequential. But the identity running the leadership behavior is still the one that formed when the priority was just getting through the week. And this is a consistent pattern that I see when I'm working with most leaders who are operating from an identity they built in a completely different version and stage in their business. And that version needed something specific from them. But whatever they're building now needs something different. What got them from 0 to 1 is not the version of themselves that's going to get them from 1 to 2 to 10. And aside from the raw output and what's necessary to scale a business past a certain stage, there also comes into question, how does the individual shift throughout the growth of the business? How do their priorities, how do their goals change? Most people don't take the time to stop and address those questions. And so when your behavior as a leader keeps producing outcomes that maybe you don't necessarily want, and the people around you are capable people, the question that is worth asking and absolutely necessary to ask is whether the way that you're showing up in the present moment is actually designed for where you are now, or if you're showing up for where you were 3 years ago. And so let me make sure to differentiate what leadership identity is precisely, because it's not a personality type or a management style. Those are things that I might work with people on more heavily in the organizational side of things. We're talking about the individual here. That leadership identity is the internal picture that you carry of who you are as a leader. Not necessarily the tangible assets, the traits that you exhibit, but what you believe your role requires of you and what standards you hold yourself to in how you show up for the people around you. Now, when that picture is clear and current and updated, leadership feels relatively natural. It fits your existing environment. Decisions get made with conviction. The team understands what's expected, not only of them, but of the company. Your standards, your values are communicated with constant repetition because they're visible in how you operate every day. And that trickles down to everyone else. But when that picture is outdated or unclear, well, we're talking about something totally different that happens here, which is you might lead inconsistently, being direct and decisive in some situations or withdrawn and reactive and defensive in others. You might find yourself holding your team to standards that you never explicitly communicated because they felt obvious to you. And so you might notice that your presence in a room doesn't carry the weight that you feel like it should, or that it carries the wrong kind of weight entirely, that you're giving the wrong impressions, or that people aren't responding effectively to you. A lot of leaders go through this when they are the ones in the center of the vortex around them and everything growing so rapidly, but they don't take the time to make sure that they're growing with it. And so that goes to say that leadership identity is less about what you do as the leader, the tangible things, the business systems and strategy, and more to do about the clarity with which you understand who you are in that role as the company is evolving, as your business and your pursuits are growing. That clarity, or the absence of it, shows up in every meeting, every decision, and every conversation where you're talking to someone on your team and they're watching to understand what you actually stand for. But again, if that's not crystal clear, then how can you possibly set clear expectations? So now that you understand the premise of leadership identity and understand its importance, I want to share with you 3 distinct ways in which an outdated leadership identity can create significant problems in your business. And the first is a communication gap of your standards. You have high standards. They feel obvious to you because they've been a part of how you've operated for years, but they've never been explicit to the people around you. Or maybe if they were once explicit, those standards have grown and those expectations were never updated. So your team is performing to a different standard, not because they don't care, but because the real standard, the updated standard, was never clearly defined outside of your own head as the business grew. And that frustration begins to build on both sides. Second problem is authority confusion. Some entrepreneurs built their entire leadership identity around being the most capable person in the room. And that works when the team was small and the tasks were really in their direct expertise and in their direct control. But as the business scales, if you're a good business owner, you're probably bringing people around you that are smarter than you, more competent than you in certain areas. That identity creates problems. You might be holding on to that I can do it all mentality, and leading from personal capability rather than from positional authority produces inconsistency. Some situations are going to get your full engagement, especially when there are areas where you still feel like you're the most competent. Others end up getting delegated in a way that doesn't really feel fully committed. And so the team learns to read which version of you is showing up that day. But that's placing them in reactivity because you can't decide how you want to lead in any given day. It just goes with the wind on what you feel like you're good at doing that day. And I would say on the structural side of business, this problem right here is probably the most relevant when it comes to growing and scaling talent and bringing on new hires and businesses that are surpassing that 1 to 2 million mark a year. This starts to compound rapidly because again, the only way to truly grow is to slowly remove yourself from the business as far as your capabilities are concerned. But that positional authority, that needs to remain in the forefront. That's how you get everyone in line to keep doing what matters, by clearly communicating expectations, clearly communicating your standards from that place of authority rather than that technician role in the business. If those first 2 problems struck a chord with you and what you've experienced in your business, make sure to take a moment and go and hit that subscribe button. There's a ton more where this came from. So moving on to that third problem, it's identity lag. I hinted at it before, but that is the gap between who you're becoming and who you're still behaving as. You've grown a lot by this point. Your thinking has evolved. Your understanding of the business is more sophisticated than it was 16, 18 months ago. But all of those behavioral patterns, the reflexes, the default responses, especially when you're under pressure, are still running the older version. And so those 2 identities, who you were and who you're becoming, they're out of sync. And that gap produces a specific kind of friction that is really hard to diagnose from inside the fishbowl where you can't see what's going on around you. So now do you want to know what a clear and current leadership identity produces? When someone's done the work of updating and clarifying their leadership identity, that change starts to show up in all sorts of specific places. Decisions start to feel way more grounded, way more aligned, because they're being made from clear understandings of what this version of the leader actually values and prioritizes. Communication becomes more consistent because there's stability. There's a stable reference point And the team experiences way less volatility because the leader's presence is more predictable. Some people hear predictability and they think people will stagnate. But no, as a leader, they need to know, if I do this, will he respond or she respond well? If I do this wrong, what's going to happen? Those clear consequences or rewards, or would allow the reward loops for a lot of people to build sustainably. So predictability is great. And it goes hand in hand with integrity. Do they know who you are through the way that you show up and you act? The most effective leaders that I've worked with aren't necessarily always the most talented or the most experienced, or really even the smartest in any sense. They're the ones that are the most honest about who they are and what they stand for and what they're asking of themselves in their role and what they ask of others. And that honesty and transparency creates a kind of consistency that people around you can grab onto and build on. And especially in a world today where a lot of people lack trust and transparency and don't really know what's what, this goes a long way. People don't connect with the smartest, most capable person that never does done anything wrong. No, just because you're their leader, they're still going to connect to you more through relatability, through honesty and vulnerability. Your team doesn't need you to be perfect. They need to be able to read you accurately. And a clear leadership identity makes that possible. And it also makes it way easier for them to fall in line with that leadership identity based on their personality profile and their tendencies. Or more particularly, it makes it way easier for someone like me to come in and help train up employees based on the leader's identity. So if any of the things that I just described is something that you're experiencing, then the starting point is an honest audit of where your current leadership identity actually came from and whether it's still a fit for where you're at and where you're building. That can be harder than it sounds because most of the patterns that I'm talking about here are unconscious. They're formed under pressure, like I said. They get reinforced over time under the radar, and they run automatically in situations that carry any kind of emotional weight. So what that means is that identifying them requires looking at your actual behavior under pressure, not the behavior that you usually intend to have when you're thinking idealistically about where you want to go. And again, leadership identity is just one of the 5 dimensions measured in the clear diagnostic. And this dimension specifically can be really tough for most people because of how unconscious it is, because it does run so much deeper than some of the other dimensions that might be more tangible, physical. So if you're unsure of whether this could be an area where your system has the most friction right now, then it's really important that you take the minute or 4 minutes to go and take the clear diagnostic, get your score. The link is in the description, and your results will help you really grasp on to how you're currently outputting right now and what you can do to bridge the gap. So go ahead. But if hearing everything that I've just said makes things clear enough for you to know that you just want to get on a call and start working with me, then you can also apply right below as well, and I'll see you on the other side. See you later. Peace.